Gravity Rush 2 is the console sequel to the Vita game Gravity Rush, and is a massive improvement in every aspect from the previous game. It truly seems like a lot of lessons have been learned by the team at Project Siren from their experience with the first game. Unsurprisingly, you reassume your role as Cat, but now with a completely new world to explore. One of the first things you'll notice are the visuals, and wow, does this game look great. Unlike the first game and its remaster, which were under the limitations of the Vita, Gravity Rush 2 has the advantage of being a console release. So, unsurprisingly, this game looks leaps and bounds better than its Vita counterpart. Most noticeably, the colour is much richer in this game, which really aids in conveying the energy and vibrancy of the atmosphere. I would say artistically the game is better too. The rift planes are just gorgeous looking. The level of detail is so great too. There are so many little details within this game that we'd be here all day if I listed them all out. The new world of Giga Paralao, God, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, is like this fusion of Rio de Janeiro and Hanoi. This vibrant marketplace, we have these performers and just random ducks and dogs walking around everywhere. It really captures the atmosphere so perfectly. It's quite different from Hexville, where Giga Paralao is very vertical and is made up of many small islands, so you will spend a lot more time in the air in this game. Gravity Rush 2 gains a lot from the expanded abilities of a console release. Even the 2D art and the cutscenes looks much better. The game is not the Crisis of the PlayStation 4 or anything like that. Just its look and style is so appealing. Definitely one of the best looking games of the current generation, I think. There are some fun new ways to interact with the world, one of these being gestures. They're fairly simple, like waving hello or just scaring people with a boo, but it's always really satisfying seeing the people react back, and it really adds this extra layer of charm. It makes you care about the people within the town more than if they were just patrolling obstacles. One of the other additions is a camera, which, as you might suspect, allows you to take photos within the game. This is such a great idea and fits the game perfectly. Now you can focus and experience the world in your own way and get a real sense for the details. Not only that, but you can express yourself with it as well by sharing them online for everyone to see. There are some amazing photos created by the community, some just for laughs, but also some, whether intentionally or unintentionally, border on real artistic photographic movements like futurism. Like I said, a really simple but fitting addition to the game. In the first Gravity Rush, the shallowness of the gameplay was pretty apparent. It was fun and unique, but there was very little in terms of options, and most of these options were not particularly useful, which resulted in using the gravity kick through the majority of the game. But boy, have things changed in the sequel, and the combat has been thoroughly balanced and expanded. All the combat options feel fairly equal in their effectiveness, and the stasis field has been completely reworked to become useful, unlike its prequel's counterpart. One of the big additions to Gravity Rush 2 is style switching. So you have your regular gravity style, which is based around regular gravity, but you get access to two other gravity styles based around the lunar and Jupiter's gravity, which completely change how you fight and even traverse. You can style switch on the fly, so you can change how you approach which enemy in a flash. But it doesn't stop there, with another of these big additions being talismans. If you favour a particular style, or a move within a particular style, you can get these talismans throughout the game that allows you to boost whatever aspects you choose. Since in the last game I did a lot of gravity kicking, I felt like playing it a bit differently and primarily used the stasis field, and it felt like a completely different game to play. But the next time I play Gravity Rush 2, I can change my talismans to favour a different playstyle, and again, completely change how I play the game. You're also not restricted with the talismans the game gives you, because you can collect your own in the wild, merge them, recycle them to make completely different talismans or better talismans. There is so much to this game. In my previous review, there was so little to Gravity Rush gameplay wise that I thought, why not just go through everything? That would be impossible for me to do with this game. It's frankly shocking to think of how much this game has progressed gameplay-wise over the course of 2 games. And I should say, it's so fun to play. I can't think of anything that plays like this series, and now Gravity Rush 2 makes it both unique and excellent to play. One of the gameplay additions to Gravity Rush 2 is its online component. Challenge missions return from the first game, but this time you can send your runs as challenges to other players. This makes challenge missions way more fun since it adds in the competitive aspect. You might not care about getting the gold, but you do want to beat that guy whose challenge flung your way. But easily one of the best online additions are the treasure hunts. All over the world are these little apple chests filled with gems and other goodies, which you can then take photos of and send to other players as hints of how to find the treasure. It sounds overly simple, but it's simply so much fun, and how each player takes their photo really adds to the uniqueness of the hunt. Some are quite practical, while others, like myself, like to take cat selfies. I spent a lot of time on treasure hunts during my time playing the game, really because it was so unique and interactive that it became incredibly fun. Maybe the dev team went into the future and saw my Gravity Rush review, because some of the main things I wanted, like greater character depth and more side missions, have really been addressed. All of the characters have a little more personality to them, and there are several side missions dedicated to expanding upon them further. All the characters have voice lines now in the fictitious language of Gravity Rush, which I think some people may find annoying, but I frankly thought it was a lot of fun. I found myself habitually quoting Kat's lines. It's not like they're suddenly these super depthful characters. That's not what they're going for. They're going for fun and charming, and they 100% achieve that. The side missions in this game are so much fun. They're honestly more fun and likable than the main story missions. A lot of them involve hitting to established characters, or the townspeople and hearing out their stories, or they're just flat out amusing and you'd be grinning at the silliness of them. Taking a picture of a mother and son together, or dealing with the invasion of the body snatchers. The side missions are very quaint and playful, and that's what makes them so much fun. There are a lot of these side missions too, almost 50. Just one of many ways number 2 expands on its predecessor. The plot is really where the main issue of the game is, and to really get into it requires spoilers, so spoilers till this time. To summarize, it's a cluttered mess, and honestly, it's a little confusing to see why this plot was deemed acceptable to go with. The game is set across 4 chapters, and how the game treats these chapters is more like standalone episodes rather than a connected story. I would say the first half of the game is okay though. Now, the first chapter is very classic sequel type stuff, where the hero of the previous installment of the story has their power and status taken away from them, and they have to rebuild from scratch. Like I said, fairly typical, and with video games you have to do this kind of power loss, since you can't start out a game as extremely powerful, otherwise there'd be no sense of gameplay or character progression. The game transitions relatively smoothly into its second chapter, where the game really starts. Now, the first Gravity Rush was all about emulating the classic hero's journey that has been part of storytelling across all cultures and generations. Now, while Gravity Rush 2 has elements of that same structure, in each chapter it has its own type of classic story element. So in the second chapter it becomes a Robin Hood-like tale, with Cat as the Robin Hood figure and a band of comrades who serve as her merry men. Again, very classic hero type stuff. This part of the game really works because you have a plot that is different from the last game, and the main enemies are not the Nevi, but the authoritarian regime who want to keep the classist system as the status quo. In reality, the Nevi are really not interesting enemies, and are just creatures who don't have any semblance of motivation. They operate like animals, so it's nice that they're replaced, at least for this chapter, with something with a kind of motivation. I think the beginning of when the story starts to fall apart is when New Hyperion is brought up, where characters are talking about this place and event that's related to Hexville, and I was just completely confused and oblivious as to what they were talking about. Little did I know, that there was a Gravity Rush animation released at the end of 2016, which aimed to bridge the gap between Gravity Rush 1 and 2, where this new Hyrulean place is explained. The animation is mostly Kat eating food and pointless action sequences with some flimsy explanation. Also, I feel like it's a pretty good rule to not have prerequisite information before your sequel that is not included within it. It's like if the original Star Wars movies required you to read a pamphlet or a comic between each movie. Anyway, back to the game. So, you liberate the town by overthrowing the evil power and bring forth equality to Juga Power Lao. Do you gather any idea why the evil power is evil? Not really. Are they ever brought up again? No. And this is only halfway through the game. So, in Chapter 3, Kat is transported back to Hexville, but time has gone by and she has been forgotten and replaced by a new hero. Again, very classic hero stuff and very classic sequel plot, where the hero's deeds have been forgotten and they must once again prove their worthiness. That's kind of the idea, but it really gets bogged down in the uninteresting villains. This chapter features a completely new set of villains who are almost completely unconnected from the previous chapter. We have Dr. Brahman, the second mad scientist villain in this franchise, and the both of them are about as interesting as Dr. Vornoff in Bride of the Monster.
I will perfect my own race of people. A race of atomic supermen which will conquer the world.
The other villain is Kali Angel, who has become the new Gravity Queen to the citizens of Hexville, and her motivation ends up with her being the lackey of Dr. Brahman, as well as wanting her sister Durga back. You think you might care about her plight, but Kali is essentially a brute and Durga acts completely crazy. The parts where Kat feels replaced and abandoned are really good and gives her a real struggle to work through. But for the most part, Chapter 3 story-wise is fueled by tiresome characters. For those of you attuned to Hindu lore, you might have noticed the titles of the Kali, Durga and Brahman figures, although it seems they hold little to no significance within the story. I get what they're doing with Kali being the goddess of time and destruction, and the deep connection between both Kali and Durga. Cool ideas, but it's just not implemented in a way where it's that interesting. So you beat Brahman and Kali, but the defeat holds little to no impact on the final chapter of the game. Chapter 4 begins by being led by a mystical deer-like figure, which is a concept commonly seen in Celtic mythology. This chapter has a lot of important developments going on and has some very classic story elements influencing it. Kat's search for self-discovery, the princess locked away in the high tower who knows she can do so much more for the world, and the fate and cycle of the hero's journey. It's a shame the chapter is extremely short and introduces another set of villains who are virtually disconnected to the other villains and events in the other chapters. To the game's credit, it at least ends on a more complete ending that really feels like it ties up a lot of loose ends, unlike the previous game. It leaves room for a sequel but still feels final. I know I may have spent an overly long time going through the story, but it's the source of the game's real issues. It feels like 2.5 games in one and has an overabundance of villains. I've complained a lot about the villains, but I want to put in context my issues with them. In Chapter 2, in Juga Power Lao, where you have essentially faceless and generic bad guys, but they're completely fine as villains because they offer a good platform to characterize the town and its inhabitants, as well as give Kat, the hero, a noble cause to fight for and develop a connection with the town. Chapter 3 is also full of simplistic plots, but the real detriment is that it gives very little development to Kat or Hexville. And Chapter 4 is completely rushed and full of pointless boss battles and barely gives enough time for the characters to process the revelations it presents. Not only is the plot weak, which is okay, not every game needs to have these amazing, intricate plots, but for the entire second half, its weakness starts to eat into the character development, and in the end brings both of them down. The original Gravity Rush's story really wasn't anything that special, but I thought it did an interesting job of presenting the hero's journey structure. Gravity Rush 2 is a mess structure-wise. It definitely has its moments where story-wise it feels stronger than the previous game, but those moments are usually quite rare. When it comes to other negatives, and this is a small thing, but I did encounter bugs surprisingly, and this footage is from around 7 to 8 months after launch. If this was launch, I would understand, but I shouldn't have to restart the game a couple times this far after launch. The other negative isn't such a small one, and that is that the online interactivity for the game is going to be cut. In late September 2017, it was announced that the online component for Gravity Rush 2 would be cut on January 19th, the 1-year anniversary of the game. This has been extended to mid-July 2018, thankfully, but the issue remains the same. No real reason has been given, but everyone knows that it was because of the underperforming sales of the game. To those who haven't played the game, or at least not played the game online, you won't be able to understand what a huge blow this is to the game. I would say I spent a third of the 40 hours the game took me just doing online activities. So in a sense, that's 13 hours of unique fun gameplay just robbed from the game overnight. It's such a shame, because all it does is make the game worse. New buyers aren't going to have as much fun with the game, and it's just not going to leave as strong of an impression as it could have. This is a Sony exclusive, published by them and even partially developed by one of their studios. You'd think they put a bit of investment into their own properties. So this leads into another question. Why is this series such a poor performer? Well, if you go back a few years, where Naoko Sato, writer of the first game, mentioned the concerns that the game was too Japanese for Western audiences. Is that true? No. Well, I don't think so at least. I think it's very easy to point fingers and say, my piece isn't the issue, it's how people receive it. These games have very legitimate issues, and to imply that you have no fault in the lack of success it achieves is ridiculous. But let's entertain this too Japanese thought a little longer. There have always been Japanese style games that are popular ever since the beginning of video games. Not even talking about Nintendo games or Western influenced games like Resident Evil 7. I mean Japanese style. There are two very good examples from 2017. And I would say that these games have their own fair share of issues as well. So why are they successful and Gravity Rush 2 is not? Well, it comes down to a few things, but I would say the most significant one is that Gravity Rush doesn't appeal to an established demographic. Something like Persona has an anime crossover audience and has a very in-your-face graphic design style that's hard not to notice. Nier Automata added more sexuality and violence than its prequel, which ended up being the key to its success. In contrast, you have the Gravity Rush games, which have a very calm and charming atmosphere, lack of violence, and has a PG rating. It has those things because that is what Gravity Rush is and what is so great about it. There is literally a side mission that has you help find an old lady's purse. It's just very quaint and comfy. So that begs the question, if you make something that is essentially unique, is it doomed to fail because there is no established audience? It would certainly be an uphill battle making it a success, but it's completely doable. There are always the pioneers who set the tone for others to build on, but you really need to have a finely tuned game in every aspect, and that is simply not Gravity Rush 1 or 2. I know I'm simplifying things, and things are always significantly more complicated than they appear to be, but you understand my point. I've been somewhat critical on Gravity Rush 2, but it does not come from a place of hate, but frustration. I love this game, I really do. It really feels special and wonderful. I just had a blast playing it, and I think I was perpetually smiling throughout the entire game. It's far from uncommon to play a great game with shortcomings, serious shortcomings, But the difference between them is that this time, shortcomings have a good chance of killing the franchise. And that thought really makes me sad. I was shocked when I read the news of the servers being cut for Gravity Rush 2. Getting cut this early, it just feels like a big sign that this series isn't going to go anywhere. If you look at the leaps and bounds made between Gravity Rush 1 and 2, it gives you this hope that a number 3 would be truly amazing. It really gives me this sinking feeling that it has to end here. It's just not fair. I want to see another game. I want to go on treasure hunts with all of you again. I want to sit down and watch the figures across the beautiful scenery. I just want to fall into the sky forever. It's just not fair that this is the end of things.